Hi, and welcome to the Bleeding Edge podcast. I'm your host, Ralph Benker, and with me on the show today, Emil Ogier. Emil, welcome to the Edge.
Thanks, Rolf. Looking forward to the show.
Well, let's kick off. So, we're going to start with the numbers that made everybody blink and investors choke on their coffee this week. Hyperscaler capital expenditure. So, first on the list, Amazon's messaging put their 2026 capex at roughly 200 billion. Can you imagine that number? It's a scale that really reframes AI investment from a product line into national infrastructure territory. This is the level of investment that these companies are making into it. Meta already deep into its build out, and their guided investment is somewhere between 115 to 135 billion in 2026, and that's also including their finance leases. And they are explicitly tying the step up to its AI efforts in the core business. It seems the advertising world is well and truly footing the bill for this AI build out. Alphabet expected spending has been discussed in the region of 175 to 185 billion. So just imagine that, Emil, between our three players there, Amazon, Meta, and Alphabet, we're approaching 700 billion in investment on infrastructure this year. I've got the smile on my face, but it's kind of real like terror thinking about these numbers.
Madness.
And obviously, if we think about Google, they've already put in about 400 billion already. So that's going to bring their bill to around 600 billion. If you add those numbers together, I think it's just a massive, 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 massive model that they are building out against. So the interesting twist is that investors can simultaneously love the long-term logic, but still focus on the quarterly optics. So the market punished them, and I believe certainly most of those stocks were down up to 10%. People are obviously getting a little bit concerned about where all that money is going. So profitability is still something that is quite far off in the language. Everybody's just talking investment. So we've also then had some really interesting news in terms of new model releases. Anthropic have released Claude Opus 4.6. I think hopefully I'll beat you to it and share some insights and news on that. I've been using Claude quite extensively, and I'm really welcoming some of the things that they are landing in this next release. OpenAI have also released GPT 5.3 Codex. So same day, but two very different philosophies. And no doubt we'll dive into a bit more detail on that. Anthropic's pitch with Opus 4.6 is breadth plus workflow integration. They're really highlighting their million token context window, which is actually in beta. And that's pretty impressive. So last time I looked, GPT 5.2 was kicking around 500,000 tokens. Gemini was 1 million. If you kind of compare that to some of the Chinese models like DeepSeek is sitting at 100K. I've been using Quen quite a bit from Alibaba this week, and their standard model is sitting at 32K. So yeah, 1 million token context window is absolutely massive, and I'll definitely share some of my experiences why that's going to be so handy. So it really also moves Claude directly into the Office surface. So some of the news that's been out and about this last few weeks has been around co-work and how they can orchestrate multiple sub-agents working in parallel. And this is really now coming to Office products. So that's quite exciting. They've got a PowerPoint add-in, which is definitely going to improve people's ability to generate more slides. On performance claims, they're actually pointing to evaluation wins on tasks that it frames as economically valuable to knowledge work. So they're really kind of focusing on stuff that's going to make a practical difference to people's lives rather than just the theoretical performance. So I think that's kind of interesting. OpenAI's GPT 5.3 Codex is positioned as a depth and agentic coding model that increasingly operates the machine like a coworker. So a lot more automation. This isn't just more sufficient. This is actual work orchestration. So I think a good play, a good move by OpenAI. It states that it's 25% faster than the prior version. And of course, for both Anthropic and OpenAI, the models are greatly improved. Some pretty impressive stats as compare, when they compare against their historical SWE Bench Pro and Terminal Bench results. What do those things mean? Well, they just mean there's a benchmark, a baseline that they can test against, and that somehow, it gives us a bit of a sense of how much these models have improved. So there's also a telling line about internal use. OpenAI says early versions were instrumental in building the model itself. So interesting parallel there with Anthropic having used Claude to actually build out Claude Cowork, and we're now seeing the same thing from OpenAI. Codex is actually building itself, which is interesting news. So we'll have to play around with some of those models. I haven't had a go with them just yet, but we'll see as they land in our various LLM tools over the next few days. Two other signals that made this week feel like the start of a new phase is incentives and security. So Anthropic published an unusually specific promo, and they're basically giving Pro and Max users an extra $50 in credits, which is really tied to their Opus 4.6 launch. Now, you might think, why are they doing that? Is Opus 4.6 actually more expensive? But it's not. It's still the same price. So you don't have to worry about that. They're actually giving us a real bonus there. So on security, OpenAI committed 10 million in API credits to support cyber defense through its cybersecurity grant program. So $10 million for folks that are basically using ChatGPT 5.3 to help them step change cybersecurity. So I'm not entirely sure how to get access to that. If I can get all 10 million, I'll definitely try and become a cybersecurity expert. But presumably they're going to be sharing the love. So I think those are the big news items that I picked up this week in terms of releases. The other one for me that I think is an absolutely fundamental structural change is SpaceX's acquisition of xAI. And no doubt we'll have some deep conversations about that. But it's obviously created a new company under the SpaceX brand. I think it's valued at something like $1.2 trillion. So it's become the most valuable company on the planet. And there are, of course, rumors of a IPO for SpaceX in 2026. Who knows? It might even come earlier. Some people are talking about as early as June 2025. Not sure that's going to happen. And then, of course, there is the big question when Tesla will actually be integrated into that monolithic technology and space exploration business. So those are the top stories. Anything catch your eye there, Emil?
Certainly has, Rolf. Thanks for the update. I know what you mean regarding the spend. They're just crazy numbers. I've got to the point now, and I'm sure we're all the same. When I see millions, I'm so desensitized. If I don't see the number billion in the news articles, it doesn't feel like it's worthy of my attention. That's clearly not the way to look at things. The Codex app is certainly an interesting one. I haven't had a chance to look at it myself, but I am hearing very positive feedback on social networks such as X. User reviews seem to be really positive, so much so that diehard Claw users are even saying they're flipping the script somewhat and bringing in a lot of more utility time to Codex. So that's really interesting. The tug of war continues against which is the best lab to use for coding. And security, I'm very glad to hear about. I think a lot more attention needs to be focused on it. I know it's not the sexy story, but it's an important story, as people scale up for enterprise use and as agency and utility increases.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're really starting to see a level of maturation, if you can put it that way, in terms of the LLMs really moving as a kind of a question answer type arrangement to something that really feels like workflow orchestration. And that's a really big shift, because I think it's at that moment that people really start to see the impact on their day-to-day life. Because a lot of what we're seeing now is, you don't really need to write every single email and every single a social media post with AI. In fact, you probably get people calling you out on it, unless it's, of course, really, really good quality and adds a lot of value. But what people want is that authentic exchange of ideas. And so, but that's what's been available to us. And so we've used it. But now, as we start moving into this kind of work orchestration, but also, with Claude Cowork actually making a variety of expert roles available to people via the platform. So you can actually get it to draft contracts, for example. So this is going to be quite a big impact, I think, on legal, but also accounting and anything else where there is information that experts kind of gather in terms of the law or regulations. So I think we're poised for a really big impact on how work is done. And that's going to go way beyond what we've seen with the chat models to date.
Indeed.
So what have you got for your first story?
Yeah, thanks. I'm quite keen on this one. I thought it'd be useful for us to take a step back away from the products and services we always focus on and rather look at the people behind it to better understand the fundamental differences between the philosophies that drive specifically OpenAI and Anthropic. Dario Amodei, founder of Anthropic, was born in 1983 and is from San Francisco. His orientation is towards knowledge and is interested in discovering scientific fundamental truth. He's not interested in things such as web development, meaning he's not drawn to what is driving Anthropic's evaluation. He's a scientist who's drawn to how things work. He lost his father, quite sadly, in 2006 to an illness with a 50% survival rate at the time. A medical breakthrough 4 years later made it 95% curable, which deeply affected him. The cure came too late and crystallized something for him and motivated his work in AI to accelerate scientific progress. I don't think many people know this. Ever since, he has focused his career on scientific advancement and the value of scientific knowledge. On the other side, we have Sam Altman of OpenAI. He was born in 1985 and learned to program at a very early age, at the age of 8. He went to Stanford to study computer science and dropped out and founded a social media company that failed. The market was not ready for user retention and user retention was low. He later joined Y Combinator, became a partner, and then a president. Y Combinator launched the likes of Airbnb, Dropbox, and Reddit. These were formative years. The strategy was to ship fast, get user feedback, and iterate. This later shaped OpenAI. It was a generation of founders who think in terms of velocity and scale. In a way, it wrote the book for entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. If scaling outpaces their ability to ensure safety, they will pause the brake to catch up. This is very different to OpenAI calling code red with Gemini, accelerating the release of ChatGPT 5.2. He built ChatGPT 2 and 3. It's not his first attempt, it's his second attempt to build AI. So what can we draw from this? Dario is a scientist. He wants to understand before he deploys. Sam deploys to understand. These are different theories over progress leadership. Safety theories. With OpenAI, safety emerges from deployment. It's YC training. The market teaches you what you cannot learn otherwise. Real world feedback is the tight feedback loop. You learn what's safe by deploying. On the other hand, Anthropic, safety is a precondition. You demonstrate safety affirmatively before scaling. You don't treat the public as your red team. Anthropic has poured everything into reasoning density, code reliability, reducing hallucinations in complex domains, and it's paid off. Lawyers, analysts, and coders turn to cloud. It's a deep vertical with integrity, structure, and a moral core. We are no longer one AI economy. We are two. The first is rapid generation. The second is managing complexity, high-stakes decisions, and professional judgment. So I thought that was quite interesting and gives you a little bit of color behind the individuals and what drives them.
Yeah, and I think we've got some big personalities there. Obviously, We've got Musk in the mix. Bezos is also driving, some pretty significant investment in AI. But then Sam has kind of been the poster child. He's the one that broke it. Obviously, you've got Demi Hassabis from DeepMind at Google. Lots of interesting people out there, but probably one of the most, let's just say, measured voices has been Dario Amodei. And he actually recently wrote a very interesting essay that had some pretty profound insights to it. And one of the things, the reason behind writing this article was that he's essentially saying humanity is entering a critical rite of passage with AI development. And he kind of changes the terminology somewhat from AGI to powerful AI. And he's saying what powerful AI will essentially be a country of geniuses in a data center. So he asks the reader to imagine there were 50 million geniuses in a country and they were let loose, to follow their agenda. What would the world be like? And so he's suggesting that that's pretty much what we're going to have soon. Of course, the AI in that sense could be likened to a swarm of agents that are able to be effective in specific vertical tasks. But the most interesting thing really that I think he called out there was that, we're talking about powerful AI that is smarter than a Nobel laureate across most fields being available in 1 to 2 years, and having 50 million instances of that AI available to go away and do work, much like the research case we spoke about in the last episode. It would define what the research topic is that's worth doing and then execute the research. That's really what we're talking about when we talk about powerful AI. It's kind of really got some level of self-determination in terms of what it's working on. And he's saying, there's an exponential progress over the last decade-long track record. And that's really quite interesting because we really think of AI a little bit as, well, there's ups and downs. And what he's saying in this essay that he wrote, from his point of view, it's just been a straight exponential line. He hasn't seen any let up of progress. And where he thinks that's going to leave us, and this is really the big profound point, 50% of entry-level white-collar jobs displaced within 1 to 5 years. And now, 5 years, we could probably start to get our heads around that. But imagine that happening, in the next 12 months. We have absolutely, no societal basis for dealing with that. And of course, it won't just be entry-level white-collar jobs. If it gets to that extent, it'll probably be a much broader impact. So any kind of low-level administrative job, any kind of sales job, you could really see these things being taken over by AI. I think, the big thing is we've had a lot of change in the past. The story I always love is the spinning wheel. So back in the days of the Industrial Revolution, every home pretty much had a spinning wheel. The way people made a bit of extra income was they would sit around the fire at night and they would have their spinning wheel, and they would basically spin wool. And they would then sell that wool. But of course, as soon as we had the industrial spinning looms and the other equipment that came along, actually overnight, it took that industry out. So almost every middle to lower class family lost an extra source of income. But that was just kind of like one dimensional. So what we're facing here is something that affects every aspect of the cognitive spectrum simultaneously. There isn't a profession that isn't untouched by it. And so we're really, what does that mean? The top of the ladder is going to get unbelievably wealthy. So he talks about a kind of wealth concentration exceeding the Gilded Age levels, with personal fortunes reaching into the trillions, which is obviously what we see Elon Musk starting to approach. But what does it mean for the rest of the folks? So yes, I think he's a really kind of, let's just say, measured, level-headed voice in the market, but he's got some pretty powerful things to say. And of course, leading Anthropic, having come out of OpenAI, I believe he was leading the OpenAI safety team while he was there, and obviously saw a few things that he didn't sit well with him. And a few of them left OpenAI to go and start Anthropic. And obviously you can kind of see, a very different outlook on the world, a very different approach. Ultimately, he's got a profitable AI venture,
Yeah.
somewhat smaller than OpenAI, but there you've got Sam Altman really the PR guy, if you like, of AI, but maybe not really as careful as what we see with Dario Amodei.
And I just thought that's really interesting, Rolf. And I want to also take the opportunity to take the other side of the coin, like for all the respect on the approach that Anthropic's doing. I must admit, I'm not sure if you're aware, there was ad, a Super Bowl ad that recently got released, and they took quite a shot at OpenAI. They effectively showed a user using OpenAI. What was the example? A kid was asking about how he could get more muscular or something along those lines, and the AI noticed that he was short, gave him some generic advice, and then sold him some insoles to make him look taller. Because if you know, OpenAI have decided to go the ad route, and effectively Anthropic is taking a shot at them, and they're taking the shot before they've even implemented it, which I think A is early, and two, it just didn't feel like Anthropic's style. So yeah, I just wonder what else is going on between in that relationship. It almost felt to me, maybe it's a bit opinionated, but it's just a little bit childish, really. And I wonder what that says to the bigger picture of AI. Because one, it was really funny, don't get me wrong, it was entertaining. But on the other side, for those that are scared of AI, that are, approaching it, they're not as well versed in what's going on as we are, Rolf. If you see that one AI company is taking advantage of you through ads, it could be bad for the industry. So yeah, who knows?
Well, they actually created 4 ads. I've watched 2 of them, and they are absolutely hilarious. And I think what they capture so well is the kind of, very professional but somewhat orchestrated output that as is
Yeah,
represented by ChatGPT. So the first example that you cited, it's actually a guy and a gym trainer. In the second example, it's a guy on a therapist's couch with the therapist. And in both cases, it starts with some generic advice and then turns into, but, you could buy this product and solve your problems. And I just thought that was really, really clever. Now, there is something quite serious going on here, because at the end of the day, these are supposed to be serious work tools, and we're kind of devolving them to the level of a Google search, and that's not what they're supposed to be. So just exactly how they're going to be able to really tie ads, how OpenAI is going to be able to tie ads into your chat experience and still kind of not compromise the quality of the information that you're trying to get to. Well, we'll have to see. Of course, Google and Meta, they've all made a lot of money out of ads. In fact, it's been their primary business model over the years. So no doubt ads will be coming to a chat near you on all of those platforms pretty soon. But I think Anthropic, maybe as you say, have they kind of just put a shot in the air too soon? What happens if they need some cash at some point and need to start running ads? That would be quite
exactly.
deeply embarrassing for them if they can't make the revenue in other ways. But having said that, they they are profitable, and they seem to be one of the few that are. So clearly they're feeling bullish, and who knows why they decided to fire that shot at OpenAI. It was worth a laugh, and I'm glad they did it. But I don't know, that kind of comparative advertising and competitive advertising, yeah, it just kind of smacks of political campaigning, and I just don't think they need to be doing that.
I guess you got to watch the space. What else you got, Rolf?
Well, I've got some interesting prompting skills here today that I wanted to share. Just one in particular that I've actually been using quite extensively. A few months ago, probably about 2 months ago, we were really kind of calling the demise of vibe coding. But I think, given the significant improvements that we've seen in some of the tools more recently, I've had quite significant success in getting apps developed and published with both anti-gravity and with Claude. And I think, I'm really seeing that vibe coding actually will come back even stronger. So despite some of the early failings, I had, April last year with Firebase Studio, I must have got through about 20 apps that I had spec'd and built but just could not get them live. And I really was quite desperate at the time. I just thought, I really want this to work, but it just doesn't. I even wrote an article about Firebase Studio and how I wanted it to succeed, but just felt like it wasn't there yet. And then, of course, we've had the evolution of Claude Code since Anti-Gravity came out, probably about 5 weeks ago now from Google. And actually, they've just started to charge for that model. So they were giving about 1 million tokens away for any user to actually, develop apps with. So it was free. You could use Gemini 3. And they've started charging in the last week for that. So a really big shift there, but a very, very capable platform. And so more recently, I've been developing with Claude Code. And one of the prompting skills that I use extensively, this is a really basic approach, is actually when you set out to build your app, you kind of use this approach of track A, which is all about the specification, and track B, which is all about the plan. So, the way that I would write the prompt is something like this: act as my senior engineer, track A. So you actually write track A, write a spec for a specific feature, whatever that feature is. And then track B, plan the work into milestones with risks and tests. Now, typically, if I'm building, what is known as a SPA, a single page application, that's just a web app with, one feature, then this is a really straightforward approach to very quickly get a specification up, but then also to build the plan and the tests. So I definitely recommend this approach. It doesn't have to be the longest prompt in the world. Just act as my senior engineer, track A, write the spec for whatever your feature is, or whatever the basic tool is that you're building. Track B, plan the work into milestones with risks and tests. Before coding, list missing info and assumptions. Start with a minimal vertical slice. So that's pretty much it. It's like 4 lines, and it makes all the difference in terms of the way that whatever the agent is that you're using actually starts the work. So it's always so tempting just to get stuck in and just give it a 1-line specification. And sometimes you can be really successful with that. But what I'm finding is actually breaking it down into milestones and then having your tests defined actually, and then asking it, what the gaps are. You've just got much clearer thinking from the LLM, and you will definitely get a better result. So there are way more complex prompts that you can use to write your PRDs, your product requirements, specifications, and the like. But if you don't have a huge amount of experience, I really recommend this very simple approach. Act as my engineer, track A, write the spec, track B, plan the work. Before coding, identify any missing info and assumptions. So definitely give it a go. It really helps the LLM because it kind of fixes this failure where it starts coding before it really has a stable requirement. Having the plan element allows it to really chunk down the development so that it's actually tackling it feature by feature, which is a much better way for them to work. And that's really what I've been finding with Claude Code. I spent 7 hours, this last weekend, basically building a specification for an application. And Claude has been coding all week on that specification. It did end up being around 7,000 lines, so it was a reasonably meaty spec as far as these things go. But there was a very clear definition of the features broken down into a plan, and that roadmap was actually written into the files. And as I say, I've been able to pretty much, develop a repetitive strain injury just from pressing enter all week, as Claude Code has been motoring its way, through that 7,000 line specification, but doing it in a really controlled manner. And so even though it's got the full context of the project, it's only executing it in line with the plan that we had set up. So I definitely have the experience that this kind of approach works.
Thanks, Rolf. I'm keen to try out that prompt. And on the vibe coding front, totally agree. It's starting, I think people are starting to notice that their pet projects that they tried last year and had fails on, they're picking them up again, trying it again, or trying other ideas. And they're finding that more often than not, things are working mostly. And I also think that's a key contribution to what's been influencing the market sell-off. If you're not aware, it's been quite a bloodbath out there, and we've created a nice infographic that we'll be sharing that outlines these themes influencing. it, so be sure to check it out.
Yeah, it's a whole new world out there. And I was kind of just totting up, this application that I was building just over the last week. It actually helps organizations design their operating models. And one of the things that I have done probably several times since 2016 is set these systems and methodologies and frameworks up for clients. And I've actually developed quite a lot of technology around it, probably spent something in the region of £1 million on setting up infrastructure around operating model design, pre AI. And as I say, I kind of distilled all of that knowledge into a 7,000 line spec over the weekend. And I have been building that application, for what will amount to probably an investment of around 200 euros in tokens and, maybe 10 hours of my time. So that just kind of goes to show, and the application that will result, if everything kind of pans out the way that I've designed it, it will be way more capable than any version that I have ever built before. And this version in particular actually gives organizations the ability to layer in agentic design. And so that you can basically look at every single process that the organization does and specify what role an agent or an agentic swarm could actually take in running that process. So I think it's going to be a really interesting version of this business model, operating model design. And I really look forward to getting it out. I have a client that I am building it for. And so it's going to get some real world experience pretty quickly. So I look forward to sharing more on that.
Superb. I've got another story for us, Rolf, if you up for that.
Let's do it.
So turning to Microsoft, Microsoft has bought QIA and paid $2 billion for it. It detects speech without audio, and they have a patent for optical sensor technology that can recognize micro expressions as speech. This is effectively an enabler for silent communication. And this isn't even the founders' first sale to Microsoft, it's their second. The first was PrimeSense, which you will recognize as the image recognition tech that is used for Xbox Connect, and later also repurposed for Apple Face ID service. It's been acquired out of stealth without them even having released the product yet. So there you go, just another very lucrative deal, and the product hasn't even landed in the market. What do you think about that, Rolf?
Well, I'm just, staggered. I think these kind of deals are all about the network. It's who you have access to and who you can start whispering into their ears early on, getting people excited, which is, presumably why so many folks end up heading out to San Francisco and Silicon Valley to just get in with that investor network. And of course, it's staggering that you can have that kind of investment and actually generate that type of value for a sale before even having a real product. I mean, there's still the story that I feel is something that I found the most inspiring was the Israeli guy. His name was Shlomo, and he started to code Base 44, which was it is an agentic coding platform, and he hit the market just at the right time. I think within 10 weeks, within 3 weeks, he had 10,000 users, and very quickly, scaled to 100,000 users, and within 8 months, sold the company to Wix, another Israeli web development platform, for $80 million. And so that was 8 months worth of work, and he only brought on the first employees to the company something like 4 weeks prior to the sale, because he obviously needed a few more hands on the pump to basically get that business ready for scale. But that I felt was pretty impressive because he had actually launched. So looking at a company achieving a 2 billion valuation, I mean, no doubt there'll be a lot of vested stock and all that kind of stuff in there. And obviously, one of the key things most of the time is they're buying the talent. And so, that presumably makes sense if that talent really has got the skills that will put you on the map with whatever those features are that they're building. So, yeah, it's staggering, I just good luck to them, really. Fantastic if you can get it. And there'll be a lot more of that, I suspect. In the age of AI, there's just so much opportunity, so many things that are yet to be invented that really can game change, various industries. So yeah, fair
Absolutely,
to.
and kudos to him for achieving that. I'm really interested to see where the product goes because I can see it having incredible potential. Can you imagine if that got inserted into an Android and it can pick up on your micro expressions, knowing what you're going to say before you open your mouth, or know how you feel before you even express yourself? The sky's the limit on that one, really. And I have one other interesting story just like that with Lovable. They now have 100 million ARR turnover, and they've only recently upsized their entire workforce, which were only 30 people to 90. So if you divide that by the number of employees, you can kind of work out how much value contribution each of those employees are bringing to the company.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, that's a real kind of step change in terms of revenue per employee. I think the best one, historically was Instagram. What did they have? Something like 14 people
Oh,
when
that's
Meta
right.
bought them for a few billion, and that was quite staggering. So these deals are seemingly kind of commonplace these days. So there's hope for us, Emil. We just have to come up with the right. Uh,
I've got one more. I'm just going to quickly cover off. Perplexity. They've signed a major 3-year deal with Microsoft for 75 million. This provides failover resilience from AWS if they pull the plug. They're saying access to Anthropic, OpenAI, and Grok through Microsoft's Foundation Foundry also influenced the deal. This could give them an opportunity to consolidate their platform and also mitigates the risk of first party access being revoked, as we have seen with Anthropic has done to its competitors. OpenAI being the most recent example for breaching terms of service using cloud code to develop their own competing software. And if you recall, not too long ago, Amazon also sued Perplexity in November last year for disguising their crawl activity for agentic shopping.
Yeah, that's quite fascinating and good for them. I think it's the age of collaboration. That's really the moat that I think will draw customers in and keep them. So it's going to be more about the ecosystem, how many tools are in the subscription as opposed to the individual tools. We've seen this with OpenAI and some of the tools that they've really integrated into their offering, and it's interesting to see Perplexity doing deals like that. Yeah, but good. I mean, I haven't used Perplexity hugely in the last few months. I think, it's a really, really solid research tool, and I think it's definitely got a role to play in the market, albeit not necessarily considered one of the frontier models, but of course, it's a kind of an aggregator that allows you to interact with all those models. And there's definitely space in the market for that. So interesting to see. So, what do you make of the SpaceX acquisition of XAI?
I have so many thoughts bouncing around in my head. Elon Musk is saying that he's using it to prepare for data centers in space, and I do believe it. Long term, it's the place to go. There's so many efficiencies to be gained out of it, but at the back of my mind, I do kind of wonder if it's also a 5D chess move to either get himself ready for an IPO or some form of shield against what both OpenAI and Anthropic are doing as they march closer and closer to their own staged IPO. I think there's some strategic battles going on. How about yourself, Rolf?
Yes, I think it's an incredible vertical integration, and it really hints at quite a significant play because it seems to be, they have both the delivery mechanism into space with the SpaceX rockets. They have the technology, obviously, to launch satellites. So they've got Starlink, they've got the distribution to consumers. Are also providing telecom services now, and that has actually effectively launched. And so, what we're really witnessing is a fascinating closed infrastructure and services ecosystem that is unparalleled. There isn't anybody that has the closed loop that Musk is seemingly building. And what's also really powerful is the way that he talks about Tesla really being a robotics platform. And I think he's actually also shelved the Model S and one of the other car models to make
Yeah.
space for the manufacturing of the Optimus robots. And so we can see quite a significant shift there. And I mean, he's definitely, keen on getting Tesla into that mix as well. I don't think the shareholders are that keen, but that's another story. I'm pretty sure Elon's going to get his way there. So this kind of level of vertical integration with rockets, satellites, and distribution, all with the kind of the XAI tools kind of running the show. And of course, Grok is also being used in both their Optimus, but also in their Tesla vehicles. And this is where they're also getting their training data. And so it's a really, really powerful offering, one that I think is probably going to be generating the kind of revenues that we have never seen. And, we're talking about something at the scale of all of the utility companies combined, because we won't just be talking about AI data centers in space. We will actually be talking about energy production in space. And as we know, one of the reasons why space data centers make so much sense is because you can get much higher yields from the sun. There's no clouds. There's just nothing in the way from that photon energy beaming into those, into those solar arrays. And so you don't have the cooling issue. Of course, you have the expense of getting it up there. And Google have obviously got their project, what is it called? Star Cloud, I think. I always forget the name, but it's something like that. And they are putting their tensor processing units out into space, and they're also testing them. So they believe they will have those data centers up and running by 2030. The big thing that Google called out was that they're banking on is basically the price per kilo of launching satellites into space coming down. They see that trajectory. But for Musk, he's already got access to that price when it makes it competitively viable, or just at least viable, to actually create space data centers. So, because he owns the rockets, and he can put as many as he wants up there.
And yes,
So,
Starlink.
and he has Starlink, and so I think all the infrastructure is there. He's also got the solar business, and so it's very interesting. You talk about 5D chess, and of course he's been putting these pieces into play
Indeed.
for many years. But things are really starting to accelerate now, and I think it's been so interesting to see that November 2022, OpenAI came out with ChatGPT. It doesn't actually feel like such a long time ago, but so much has happened since then. At that point, we looked at Google, and they were still kicking around with Bard at the time. Bard was the name of their AI platform that obviously changed into Gemini, and everybody was calling out, how can Google be this far behind? Then Gemini 3 came out at the back end of last year, and it blew everything out of the water. Multimodal AI, video capability, image capability with Nano Banana, chat capability, reasoning capability. And not only that, many, many different tools. Now, we're looking at it realizing actually maybe the one that we should have been watching was XAI, because they've been putting an entirely different stack together. So, yeah, Google's advantage is they have got their TPUs, their tensor processing units. They don't have to go to NVIDIA to buy their AI processing capability. And maybe that's the only gap that I see that Elon has not yet quite solved. But obviously, with his Colossus data center and the amount of training that he's actually able to process, it's quite staggering. So I think he's kind of got a full service model there, and no doubt he'll be adding some chips and processing units soon.
And not just that, Rolf, to add even more color to the story, he's the first human to have surpassed 800 billion worth of wealth. And not only has he surpassed 800, he's worth close to 850 billion. And he's on target to become the first trillionaire.
Yeah, and I think he'll do it. And obviously, all of those things are quite interesting, but I do really think something fundamental is happening here with AI. We're kind of, just been talking earlier about moving from the chat phase, if you like, to workflow orchestration. So actually AI helping you to achieve tasks with its agentic automation, and that seems to be gathering pace. But what happens next is, as we move into ambient AI, and what they call embodied AI. So actually, robotics AI, this starts to become physical. And that's a really interesting game changer. And of course, one of the things that I came across this week, I think it's a story that you and I have shared, was the platform Upwork actually posting jobs that were set by agents that actually needed humans to go away and execute a task,
That's
and
right.
like go away and deliver something. And I just thought that was absolutely fantastic. We've all been worried about the agents taking our jobs, but now they're giving us jobs.
It's crazy, and it's as batshit crazy as it sounds. In some ways, it actually makes some sense to me because we're trying so hard to get God out of the box, and there's more rudimentary, basic things that agents will need to do as their tool chain, as they get more access to tool chains. Like, they run out of memory, they need more RAM, or that they need to be transported somewhere else. It's all things humans can easily do that we don't need to generate these overly complex systems for machines to do. So it's the line's getting gray and we're traveling in both directions now.
Yeah, some pretty unexpected outcomes there, and just interesting to see platforms like Upwork, kind of moving in that direction. Obviously, as you say, it makes complete sense that we would end up there. But yeah, that's pretty much my news for the week. I just have one more tiny story that caught my attention that had to do with Amazon's announcement around their 200 billion investment in capex in AI infrastructure and GPUs in 2026. This is kind of, the announcement was by Andy Jassy, who is Amazon's chief exec. He's really the one that's obviously driving this agenda. Bezos is off sailing his glorious yacht around the world. But one of the things that I just thought was such a fascinating statement, he said, we are releasing over 1,000 new apps this year. So stuff that they have already built. So,
Wow.
these tools that obviously they have built for customers. And I think, you know, it's really ushering an age of creativity. And so SaaS definitely is going to take a big knock. But actually, I think what it will mean is SaaS will have to deliver even more value. So these are software as a service platforms that people essentially rent. Yes, it's possible to code a CRM in a weekend. And maybe that's the right thing to do, if you really feel the need to do that. But I think, the real race is to invent the wheel. So build that thing for the first time and set it up so nobody else has to reinvent the wheel again. It just doesn't make sense that we're all going to build our very own CRM when there are so many CRM applications that are very capable out there, unless there is some differentiator. And so, here is the lesson for me. If you have a truly differentiated idea, there's never been a better time to actually go out and build it. And all it can take is a weekend, but that doesn't mean you should do it. And so, can you imagine how much energy and how much token expenditure there is with people solving the same solution, building the same thing that's already out there just because they can? And
Indeed.
so that's the other side of the story. We're calling the end of days for SaaS, but actually, the tremendous waste and investment that's going into stuff that's already built, and we're just reinventing the wheel again and again.
And to look at another angle on this, the same problem. I'm like anticipating an absolute explosion in the app store of new service apps. And I just wonder who's going to be the gatekeeper, who's going to be the curator and the quality control, a security guard on these. Are we just going to get a tsunami of apps and get overwhelmed by choice, or are we going to figure out a way of filtering these out to know what to look at?
I think curation will be, one of the key reasons why podcasts like this will exist, because newsletters, there are so many great newsletters out there that are just helping connect people with value adding technology. But my prediction is this: if you are a marketing agency, if you are an accountancy, if you're a law firm, if you are a consultancy, people aren't going to take you seriously unless you have your own cadre of apps. And I think this is one of the things I'm doing with my clients,
Good point.
When I come in, I don't just come in as Ralph Benker. I come in with as Ralph Benker and his agent swarm. It's my agentic capability that is really the value add. And so I do think you're right. There is going to be a proliferation, but the expectation is going to be that it's human plus their agentic swarm, and that agentic swarm will essentially be the representation of your life's work. It's your IP just automated. And so I actually think for many consultants, but also anybody in a professional services firm, this is actually a golden moment. If you are just going to be relying on your own skills, you're probably going to be in a lot of trouble. But if you can actually build your agentic swarm and go to market with that as an offering, then that's going to make you just that bit more valuable and desirable, really, for clients. And I think that's the big shift that's coming. And so it's not so much, who's going to buy your app. It's who's buying you is also buying your app. You're not going to have 1,000 users, or maybe, even 100 users, but you might have 10 users. And certainly some of the apps that I'm building, that's the way I'm looking at it. I will have a handful of clients, and those apps will be solely available to those clients and nobody else. And that's the reason they will want to work with me, because I'm bringing that level of amplification with the technology I can bring to bear.
That's great advice, Rolf. And seeing the same trend operationally in bigger enterprises, managers don't want to see specs anymore. They want to see prototypes. So it's all in the merit. Completely agree.
There you go. Our attention span is reducing even further. Show me the working app. I don't want to talk about it. In
Yeah.
fact, I had that very conversation with the client earlier, and I was explaining this, fantastic concept, and they said, "Ralph, we just want to see it." I said, "Okay, all right. We'll get building it over the weekend. So let's see if I can get that done for Monday." But those are all the stories I had. Have you got anything to wrap us up?
No, I think we're good, Rolf. Thanks. It's been a blast as always.
Fantastic. What a great episode. Emil, thank you so much. And we'll see you on the edge.
Adios.